So today, I'm going to be demoing a dish, cooking a dish that's called chicken saute. Very simple, easy dish to make. It's a little more complex than ones we've done before, maybe a little more complex than some of you are used to. That's all right. This will give you a good opportunity to do some things. This is going to be demonstrating the saute method of cooking, which we've talked about a little bit already. But before we get into the actual cooking and showing you all the ingredients, I want to demonstrate just a couple more cutting techniques. Again, you can see this is the third time we're doing some cutting techniques. How important it is when you're cooking, how much of cooking is done, cutting is a part of that. So I want to demonstrate a couple of things. So I'm going to start by sharpening my knife, honing my knife, as we've talked about before. I've got my steel. First thing I want to demonstrate is a very easy way to cut an onion. So what you're going to start by doing is we've got an onion here, and we've removed most of the skin. Might could get a little bit more off. But what I find is an easy way, once you get down to this part, is to cut the end off, both ends actually. And then you can see right here, I've got kind of some yellow skin. It's starting to dry out. It's a little lighter than this brown stuff right here. So what I'm going to do is just very easily, gently with my knife, cut through that first layer of skin that's kind of yellow. And we're just going to peel that off. You see it peels off very easily, just like that. Now, there's a couple of ways you can cut onion. One is what's called from top to bottom, or from stem to root. The other way is just cutting side to side. I'm going to demonstrate the first cut is cutting right down the middle. We're going to split the onion in half that way. You can kind of see here we've gone from top to bottom. Now what I could do, if I wanted a particular kind of cut, I could leave my onion like this and continue to cut top to bottom and have some nice little slices like that. But today, for what we're going to be doing, I want to start either at the top or the bottom, and I'm going to cut some small sections. And notice I'm kind of holding on to these so they don't fall apart. You'll see why here in just a moment. I'm trying to cut them pretty thin, because this is going to help us to not mince, but we're going to do a small dice on our onion. I'm going to rotate this so that I can come this way, and now I'm going to start, and again, I'm going to make small cuts, putting just a little bit of space in between each one, and you'll see, because of the way an onion is made, the way it grows, now I have some small diced onion right there. So I'm going to set this off to the side because we're going to need it just a few minutes for our recipe. Now, even though this was a small onion, and the demo I'm going to be doing today, we're only going to use not even all of what we just cut. So let me just show you the other way that you could cut the onion. So we split it in half from top to bottom. Now, instead of doing cuts this way, I'm going to turn it, and again, I'm going to cut slices from top to bottom. So again, a lot of this just depends on the recipe you're making and how the onion needs to be. Say if you were doing like a stir fry or something where you wanted some nice long slices of onion, you'd cut it like this. What we're going to do today is the dice, which I just did. So again, just some different ways of cutting an onion there. All right, I'll push that off to the side. Now the other thing that I want to show you how to do is how to cut a chicken, a piece of chicken, a chicken breast. So I've got right here a very large, as you can see, very large chicken breast. I do a lot of my shopping at Walmart, and it's very hard to find small chicken breasts. It's very hard to find a small pack. The pack that you buy is going to be a couple of pounds, and it's going to have very large pieces like this in there. We don't want a piece this big, and there's a couple of reasons. Number one, a piece this big, and you can kind of see right here how thick this is, and you'll notice that it tapers. It's very thick up here on what's called the lobe, the top part of the lobe, but it tapers off and gets thinner down here. Well, when you're cooking chicken, you want your chicken to get up to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. That is where salmonella is killed. And we don't want salmonella poisoning for anybody. But in order for this thick piece to get cooked all the way to 165, guess what? This thin piece down here is going to be way over 165. And that's what happens when a lot of people cook chicken. They want to get it cooked properly. We obviously want to do that. But then it winds up being dry and sometimes rubbery and just not very good because it's been overcooked. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this piece of chicken up here so that we can cook it and get it prepared so that it all cook in the same amount of time and we don't have to overcook it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to thin this out some. Again, we've got a thicker piece up here and a thinner piece down here. This is a huge piece of chicken. We don't want this much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to hold it parallel with my cutting board, and I'm going to come in right here about where it starts to get thicker, and I'm going to start cutting into it. I'm going to use my hand to guide, just pressing down, and I'm cutting into the chicken. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a piece of chicken that is now has the same relative thickness all the way through. So now we've got this whole piece right here that's about the same thickness here and about the same thickness here. This takes a little practice, and again, you need a good sharp knife, but now I've got, it's all pretty much the same thickness. If you had a smaller chicken breast, say one that was only this big to begin with, and it had a thick part and a thin part, what you could do is a second technique where you take some plastic wrap, and you take a small piece of plastic wrap, and you put it over your piece of chicken, and you take what's known as a meat mallet, and on the meat mallet, on this one I've got two sides. I've got a side with some little bumpy spikes on it. This is for tenderizing meat, or I've got a flat side. This is just for pounding out meat to the right thickness. So I'm just going to take my flat side right here and lightly, I'm not going to try to kill this, okay? I'm just going to lightly pound out the thick part of this smaller piece. And what I'm only going to do the thick part, because I don't want to pound the thin part any thinner. I want to get the thick part to the same thickness as the thin part. Again, I want it to be the same thickness pretty much all the way through. Set this off to the side. Now I've got a piece of chicken. Again, I've pounded that out, so it's pretty much the same thickness all the way around. I'm also going to trim this up. You see we've got some bits of fat here. I'm just going to trim those off real quick. You also might have on a piece of chicken, you may have some connective tissue, especially on this side. So we're going to trim that off as well. Now you can save this to make a chicken stock. It's perfectly edible, but some of those pieces are a little tough and hard to chew. So we're just going to trim it off just to make it a little easier. Now, depending on the size of the pan that you're going to be using, you may want to cut a big piece like this into some smaller pieces. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm just going to kind of cut this at an angle. You might not want to eat a piece of chicken that big, or you might just want to serve a smaller portion. In the restaurant industry, you can specify the weight of a chicken breast that you get, a 2 ounce, 3 ounce, 4 ounce, all the way up to whatever. But again, in the grocery stores nowadays, it's kind of, you got to take what they've got. So this is how you can make some smaller pieces here. So in just a minute, we're going to move over to the stove. I'm going to take this piece of chicken along with the onion that I just cut. Oh, one other thing I wanted to show you. First, I'm going to go wash my hands real quick. And the reason I'm washing my hands is because I've been handling raw chicken, and now I'm about to touch something else that's raw and not cooked, so I don't want to cross-contaminate. This is what's known as a bulb of garlic. If you're familiar at all with garlic, you've probably seen this. Sometimes this is called a head of garlic, an entire head. And inside the garlic, and I'm going to peel some of this little papery stuff off right there, you have what are called the cloves, or sometimes they're called toes of garlic. But I wanted to show you, because sometimes people get confused. They think that this is a head of garlic. This is just a toe or a clove, a single clove. Now, again, depending on the recipe you're using, it may call for X number of cloves of garlic. But as you can see here, this clove is pretty big, whereas this clove's a little smaller. So as we talked about before, when you're looking at a recipe or even writing your own recipe, you want to specify probably what you want to do, especially if you're going to be mincing up your garlic, is specify the number of teaspoons or tablespoons of minced garlic. That gives you a much more accurate measurement. And instead of saying, 2 or 3 cloves of garlic, because you might have cloves that are giant like this, or you may have cloves that are really small. Let's see if I can get into the inside of this one here real quickly and show you. See, this is a clove, but look at this clove compared to that clove. So again, use your proper measurements. Minced garlic, you want to probably use tablespoons or teaspoons to specify that. So I'm going to move over to the stove here in just a moment, and then we'll demonstrate chicken saute. Okay, so we're over at our stove now, and we're ready to get started on chicken saute. We do have a few more ingredients with this recipe than what we've used before. That's okay, so I want to go over those real quick with you so that you can gather them up. And again, if we're in live club meeting time, we'll just watch this through. If you want to go back after we're done and watch the video after I go through the ingredients, you can pause it. I'm also posting the recipe for this in modules on the club website, so you can go there and download it and do your shopping as necessary. So obviously we've got our chicken right over here. We prepped that already. We're going to use about a half a cup of all-purpose flour, and I put it in this pan right here just so that I have the sides right up there to keep the flour from getting anywhere. You don't have to use the pan. You can use just a plate, something that you can put the flour on and then use it to dredge the chicken in, which we'll do in just a moment. I've already prepped some vegetables. I've got my minced garlic. I've got some chopped fresh basil, and I've got some fresh basil chiffonade, which we talked about last time. I've got my seeded diced Roma tomatoes. I have a half a lemon. We're going to squeeze a little lemon juice out of that in a minute. We also are going to need some extra virgin olive oil, some white wine, about a half a cup of white wine. Now, I don't know how many of you use white wine or use wine or alcohol at home. Part of classical cooking is the use of different wines and liquors and things like that. If you don't use that, or your parents don't want you to, or you don't have it at home, it's fine. It'll change the taste just a little bit, but it'll still be delicious. So if you don't have it, don't worry about it. Or if your parents don't want you using it, that's okay. But if you can, I recommend a half a cup of white wine. We're also going to be using a half a cup of chicken broth or chicken stock. And I want to show you a couple of things right here. You can obviously buy the chicken broth already in the container like this and measure that out. In restaurants, and what I like to use at home, this is what's called chicken base. It's basically the chicken broth that is made and then cooked down into, and I'll show you here, almost like a paste. It really is a paste. And what you do is you just measure this out by the spoonful and mix it with water, and it makes chicken broth. It's kind of like what bouillon cubes do, except this is, again, more of a paste instead of that solid. I like this because I can keep this on hand in the refrigerator and mix up lots of chicken broth instead of having to take up a lot of space with these right here. So I like to use this. They sell this in the soup aisle at most grocery stores. They have chicken, beef, garlic, vegetable, different kinds like that. So I highly recommend this. I use this a lot. So, and then we're going to need some salt and pepper for seasoning. So what we're going to do first is we're going to turn our eye on. All right, we got that lid. We're going to put it on about medium heat. And we're going to add what will probably be a couple of tablespoons of oil. It's hard to tell how much you need exactly, and that's why I'm not going to put it in the recipe an amount, because it depends on the size of your pan right here. This is an 8-inch saute pan. Depending on the pan that you're going to be using, you may need a little more or a little less. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pour enough oil just to almost cover the bottom of our pan here. And I say almost because as this oil heats up, it's going to expand some. So put just enough. And again, this is the saute method. This This is called a saute pan. It's a type of pan that you use. You notice how it has the kind of sloped sides right here. So we're going to let that oil heat up. While that's heating up, I'm going to season my chicken with some salt and pepper. And we're going to season both sides of the meat. And anybody know why we do that? I know you can't respond right now because you're watching a video, but we season both sides because we're going to eat both sides. So season both sides, flip that over. Obviously you can use kosher salt if you want. I'm just using these shakers because it's a little more convenient. So we've got salt and pepper. Oh, one ingredient I forgot to bring over is the diced onion, small diced onion that we did just a few minutes ago. So we're going to need that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what's called dredging. I'm going to dredge my chicken in this flour. Again, this is just some all-purpose flour. Just going to kind of pat it down like this. And shake off the excess. I'm going to set that to the side. Since I've got 3 pieces of chicken here, I'm going to use 3 pieces. The recipe, I think, calls for 1. You could obviously increase that by just multiplying. Like if you're cooking for your family and you want to do 4, then just multiply all your ingredients by 4. So if it calls for a 1/4 cup of onions, multiply that by 4. You would want to use a full cup of onions. If it calls for 1 tomato, you would want to use 4. So just multiply it that way. So we've got all of our chicken dredged and floured there. Now one way we can test to see if the oil is hot enough, you can see if it starts to shimmer, but in other ways you can take a little pinch of this flour. Don't use water, use flour. Put it in there, and if it starts to sizzle, then you know it's ready. This is not sizzling just yet, so we're going to let this heat up just a little bit longer. Again, I've got all my ingredients. Remember, this is what we call mise en place, having a place for everything and everything in its place. So I've got everything ready to go so that when it comes time to put it in the pan here, I'll have it. I won't have to stop and prep anything. Meanwhile, my chicken's burning, all that good stuff. So, all right, another way that you can tell if your oil is getting ready is you'll start to smell it, especially if you're using olive oil or any oil really. You'll start to smell it as it heats up. So this is almost ready. So again, I'm going to test it. Now we've got some sizzle. So I'm going to take my chicken, and when you place your meat or whatever it is in your pan, you want to put it and put away from you like that so that you're not pushing any hot oil towards you. So when you place it in the pan, always place it and put it down away from you. All right, so we're going to get these 3 pieces going. Another thing that you will need is you'll need some tongs so that when it comes time to turn your chicken, you can do so. So I've got some tongs here. Don't ever leave your tongs or your spoon or anything in your pan because, number one, if they're not heat proof, they could actually get in there and melt and get ruined. Another reason, even if they are heat proof, the heat's going to be coming up the side of the pan here, and I don't want it getting this hot, and then when I go to grab them, burn my hand. So make sure you leave these off to the side somewhere. We're done with the flour for right now, so I'm going to set it off to the side. So we're just going to let these brown a couple of minutes on each side, and again, because we've cut them, we've pounded them out a little bit, they're a little bit thinner, they're not super thick, so it's not going to take a whole long time for them to cook. But one way I can check to see if they're done is I've got an instant read thermometer right here. It's also called a thermocouple. So when it gets time after I've turned them, I'm going to turn this on, stick it in the chicken, and once it's up to 165 degrees, I can pull it, I know it's done. And actually on this dish, we can undercook it just a bit because we're going to finish cooking it in a little bit in the sauce that we make. So we just want to get some color on these chicken breasts here. And I can see that the flour that's in the pan is already starting to brown a little, and I can see the edge of this piece here. So I'm going to take this piece. This is the first one I put down. I'm going to turn it over, and you can see we've already got some nice color on there. It's starting to brown. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the other pieces as well. Again, when you turn, Put it down away from you so that any grease or oil that might come up is going away from you. So we'll let these cook a couple of minutes on that side. And the next thing that we're going to be adding will be our garlic and onion. So I've got those right here. And I'll say this too, you'll notice that I've got these in containers. As I talked about before when we talked about mise en place, you don't have to buy little containers like this. Although they're very inexpensive, you can pick these up at Walmart or places like that. I think these little plastic cups are maybe 50 cents a piece. So if you're going to be cooking, might get some of those. I also got these there. They might maybe were a couple of dollars. They're nice to have. So if you can afford it and you want to, get you some mise en place containers. These are known as ramekins, and that way you can use it when you're doing your cooking. So this is almost done here. Switch that around a little bit. And what we're going to be doing after we pull this chicken is basically we're going to be making what's called a pan sauce. We're going to be taking this cooked flour that's in there, and we're going to be adding some other things, some vegetables and then some liquid, and making a sauce in the pan and returning the chicken to it and then serving it that way. So we're sauteing the chicken, and again, sauteing is to just cook in a thin layer of grease, oil, fat, something like that. So these are almost ready. So again, we're going to be returning them to the pan here shortly to finish cooking. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them, zip off any excess grease, and I've got a plate right here that I'm going to put them on. Going to keep them warm right here. All right, so those are right there. I'm just going to swish that around a little bit. You can see we've already got some flour that's sticking to the bottom of our pan. That's fine. We'll get that up in just a minute here. That's called fond. And I'm going to add just a pinch more flour and swirl that around for just a moment there. All right, so now we're going to add our onions, our garlic, swirl that around a bit, and we're going to cook those just until those onions start to turn translucent. Translucent, for those of you that don't know, meaning you can start to see through them. We're not going to cook them down all the way. We're not going to brown them or anything. So just cook them until they begin to come translucent. About a minute or two on this. I wish you could smell this, and if you're going to be cooking this at home, you will smell it. It smells delicious already. Now, for our next step, if you're using the wine, we're going to put our wine in on the next step. If you're not using the wine, then don't worry about this step. You would go straight to your tomatoes. All right, so I've measured out a half a cup of wine. So we're going to add that to our pan. And we're going to let that reduce. Reduce means you let some of the liquid cook out, and the amount of liquid reduces down. So we're reducing this, and you can see the flour in here combined with that wine is already starting to thicken and create a type of sauce. You can see it's getting thick there. So once that reduces to that thicker consistency, then we're going to add our tomatoes. Again, diced Roma tomatoes. And we're going to let those cook down for just a minute or two. If you need to stir, if you're not comfortable doing the pan like I'm doing here, you can either use your tongs or you can get a wooden cooking spoon or a high temp spatula, something that will not burn or melt in this oil and sauce mixture right here. All right, so we'll let those tomatoes cook just a bit. Now I've got a half a cup of chicken stock. Again, I used the chicken base and just reconstituted it. You can use the boxed or canned chicken broth, or you can make your own chicken broth if you want to. We're going to take half a cup of this and add it in. Give that a little swirl. We're also going to add a few drops of lemon juice. I'm just going to squeeze right from this half of lemon that I've cut here. I've removed some of the seeds there. If you want to squeeze the juice ahead of time to make sure that you don't get any seeds in, that's fine. But I'm just going to squeeze. Well, there goes a seed right there. Shows you how much I know, right? So we're just going to pull that out. And squeeze a few drops of lemon juice. There we go. Swirl that around. Now again, we're going to let this reduce now just a bit. So when it starts to come back to a boil, then we're going to add in some chopped basil, and we're going to add our chicken breasts back in and let them finish cooking off here. So you can see this is starting to simmer again. So we're going to add the fresh basil. And now we're going to add our chicken breasts back into this pan sauce and let them finish cooking. As they cook, this sauce will reduce. It will continue to get a little thicker. And then once that's done, we'll plate that up and show you how it turns out. All right, so our chicken has finished cooking. The sauce has begun to thicken. So what we're going to do now is plate it up. We're going to take our tongs and take one of these pieces. And if you want to, you can turn each piece of chicken over real quick just to get a little of that sauce on there. This would be great. I didn't cook any, but this would be great over some pasta, some angel hair or linguine, even some fettuccine. We're just going to do it straight like this. We're going to take a piece of the chicken there, put it right in the middle of our plate. Then we're going to take some of this sauce that smells absolutely wonderful and just kind of ladle that over the top there. Now we've got our fresh basil chiffonade. We're going to sprinkle some of that on top as a garnish. Turn this off. And there we have chicken saute. Again, delicious dish. Got enough sauce there, it would be good on top of some pasta, or if you like rice, or even with a nice piece of crusty French bread just to kind of sop that up. So chicken saute. Hope you'll do this at home. Hope you enjoy it, and bon appetit.